price of living when you lie. Death is not the end.
Hello, and Merry Christmas. And that is if you're actually watching or listening to this in December. If you're not listening to this or watching this in December, then, forget the Merry Christmas bit. I'm JR again, with Robert again from the Blow Monkeys. Hello, Robert. How are you?
I'm okay, JR. Very well, thank you.
And this time we are going to be talking about Other Folk, which is kind of a bit of an outlier among your albums for all sorts of reasons, being largely an album of cover versions. So I thought we'd use this as an excuse to talk about sort of other artists that you like, being that it's the Christmas podcast, I guess. And so it might be nice on the sort of Christmas edition of this thing to talk about other people rather than talking too much about yourself for a change. But yeah. I've got to say, you've made this conversation...
We talk about other people in relation to myself.
Well, exactly.
And we completely ignore the fact that it's Christmas because I'm not a Christmas person. I was always a New Year person in my family. Hogmanay was always a big... and I always like the idea of that fresh beginning and all that. Christmas, not for me. I mean, I do like the lights, Diwali and all that, and the pagan kind of a thing about it. But I was walking around in the local... there's a shopping centre near me, big shopping centre, one of the largest in southern Europe.
Oh, wow.
Those air-conditioned nightmares where they pump you full of music and lights and they tell you you're not good enough. And then at the end of it all, there's a food hall where you can eat crap food just to top it all off. So it was one of those, and of course it's all Christmas. I was just dying to get out of there before that god-awful Paul McCartney song came on, but I didn't. Anyway, I digress. This one. Other Folk. I'll tell you, the thing about that was...
Well, I was going to ask this. Before we talk about the songs, You didn't set out to do a covers album. You set out to do something else, and this kind of happened by accident. Is that right?
We were playing, I don't know what year it was. I think it was 93 or 94. We were playing the Phoenix Festival. And I remember I remember it because it was a year that Bob Dylan headlined. Or supposedly headlined, but in the last minute, Suede headlined instead. And I remember having a little, should we say, not heated, but lively discussion with Brett from Suede going, are you sure? Are you sure? And anyway, and that's the only time I've ever met Bob Dylan, by the way. My wife gave him a copy of, Michelle gave him a copy of Realms of Gold, which, he was incredible, Dylan, because he was in the backstage bit, where they were having food and stuff, and he had no presence at all. I didn't realise until I went to the salad thing that was Bob standing there with a hoodie on. He was able to sort of merge. Anyway, we were supposed to go and do this album for a label called Permanent Records, I think, who had put out a couple of our things before.
Yeah. And
we had a deposit down at the studio, which was the chapel in South Thornsbury, Lincolnshire. And anyway, the record company folded and said we can't do it. So I had a whole album ready to go. After we did the Phoenix Festival, we were going to go straight there and record this new album, what would have been the follow-up to Bethesda. And I had the band. I had Mick. Mick was back with me for playing live, Mick Anker. I had Brian Bethel, my old mentor, playing guitar, and a guy called Tansai Omar, who was playing drums. And I got the news that the thing had been pulled while we were at the Phoenix Festival. So rather than waste the 4 days that we'd already had down as a deposit, I said, well, let's just go. Let's just carry on. And we're not going to be able to do the album I wanted to do because I'm going to need more time than that. But why don't we do a cover versions album, which I'd always wanted to do anyway.
Yeah.
So as we sat in the bus, I just made a quick list as we went there on the way to the studio of what ones we're going to do. And the guys in the band didn't know a lot of those songs. I mean, I played them once. I found versions and played them once, and that's how we did it. That's how we came up with the idea. Really, it was kind of making good of a bad situation.
Do you know, that's a funny idea. These guys playing songs that they don't really know. I wonder if that's part of what makes. Well, because this album it's not one of my go-to sort of Dr. Robert stroke Blow Monkeys albums because it's other people's songs. And obviously when I listen to a Blow Monkeys album, I want to listen to your songwriting, which is not to say I don't like it. And it's not to say I haven't played it plenty over the years, but it's not one that's at the forefront of my mind if I want to stick on Blow Monkeys, right? Or Dr. Robert. So it's not an album that I am as familiar with as I am with, say, some of your other records, but in the last month since we last did one of these, I've played it about 5 or 6 times, and it has a sort of really distinctive, coherent sort of quality, which you wouldn't necessarily expect with an album of cover versions. With an album of cover versions, you kind of expect so much diversity that it sounds a little bit like a compilation album, but this doesn't. And I wonder if that's the reason why, because you're playing with people who don't necessarily know the songs, so they're cohering around a sound while you are sort of putting the other people's songwriting over the top of that, so that other people's songwriting is kind of the icing on a sponge that's kind of built by these 3 guys who are sort of doing their thing against you doing other people's thing. Do you think that's a fair thing to say, maybe? Or just tell me to shut up, you know?
Well, no, I mean, I think that's a fair thing to say. Of course it's a fair thing to say. There's nothing unfair about it, put it that way.
Yeah.
But I mean, basically, the reality is that we had such a short time, and also the way the particular setup in the studio was such that you know, I wanted to record live. There was no point in building a record.
Yeah.
Let's set up and play it all live. And that studio was not built for that. It was not built for that. That's why I kind of coined the term spill factor, because everything was coming. We took all the microphones off of the drums because you didn't need any mics on the drums. They were coming down my vocal mic. They were coming down the mic. Mick was playing double bass. Everything, it all spilled into one great mush in this, what is a converted church, which was ideal for what I wanted.
Yeah.
In the end, it was luck that it turned out that way. So the way it worked was I would say, okay, we're going to do, you upset the grace of living when you lie. It's a song by Tim Hardin. Here, this is how it goes. I played the record once, right? You got it. It's in G. Let's do it. Just follow me. Watch me. And I loved all that because I was right in the middle of my kind of obsession with that kind of way of recording, first takes.
Yeah.
And I had the band with me that could do that. I mean, Brian Bethel and I, you know, he, like I said, he's the guy that I met in Australia. He's my mentor in a sense. And, you know, we kind of had a telepathic kind of thing going. And we still, you know, when it comes to playing, I haven't had that with many people, but he's one. Mickey Boyle, obviously, I know Mick. And I love Mick on the double bass because it makes him keep it simple, but he comes up with these incredible ideas. Tansai, he was new to me. I never recorded with him, but he had a great feel. So I just played it live. I just stood in front of the mic and played it live, and then we would do 2 or 3 takes, maybe. Sometimes not even that. Other things were made up on the spot, you know. So it was like that. We only had 2 days recording, 2 days mixing. And the reason I think it sounds coherent, obviously, I brought in Halfway to Heaven, which I was working on anyway separately, and I wanted to do a different version of that or update that because I thought that was a really strong song that had kind of disappeared on Bethesda, and I thought maybe that could be a single. So basically, I think there might have been 1 or 2 overdubs, and that was it.
Yeah.
You know, so the reason it sounds coherent is that we were all playing the same instruments in the same space in the same 2 days.
Yeah. And that absolutely comes through.
I'd do that again. I love that.
Yeah.
You know, that's Neil Young. That's what he does. You know, that's those guys, Van Morrison, that's Dylan. You know, they don't muck about. They get you before any kind of self-consciousness is kicked in, before anything like that. You just, and you know, that's the first time I really did that.
And you can tell that those guys are really up for that as well. You can tell they know their instruments, and they know just the sort of, it's all about the feel of it, isn't it? Rather than the sort of technical aspects.
Yeah.
They're really good with the technical stuff, but it's about feeling the songs and feeling the music and getting into a groove and a rhythm with it.
Totally. And I mean, and because I'm singing it as we do it, it's really led by the voice. So they're just reacting to me when I'm going up, when I'm going faster, slower, when I'm a bit more intense, or when I'm laying back. They are. And you just can't get that unless you record in that way with people who are sympathetic to it.
Yeah, yeah. And it must have been nice to be back with Mick.
Always nice to be back with Mick. He's a gentleman. He's one of the nicest people in show business, if not the nicest. He's a lovely guy, Mick. You know, he's got his thing. He worries a lot about this and that sometimes, but he's one hell of a player and a very unusual bass player. I mean, I play bass. Brian Bethel, my friend, is a bass player first, guitar second, but both of us look at Mick and go, no, Mick, you're doing things we just don't do. You know, it's unusual. It's different.
Yeah, I think he's amazing, frankly.
He is. He is. You watch him at a gig, and it's a mystery. He's just watchable on his own, and what he's doing, especially if you know a little bit about playing, and you look at him and you think, well, what the hell is he doing? Because they're not cliches. There's nothing.
No.
He's just making it out because it looks like he's improvising all the way, but he's not. He's thought this out.
Sometimes you look at him and you can't actually see him doing anything at all, and yet you can hear it, so you know it's happening, and you're just thinking, I can't see what his hands are doing. I can't see where they're going. I can't see what's happening.
Yeah, he's clever. He has lots of open strings, but then he's doing something up here, and he's very good with the kind of harmonics and all that. Mick is great, you know. And I think if we'd have had a bass player in the Blow Monkeys who was into the same sort of music that I'm into, it might not have been as good. What gave Mick and us our kind of sound in a way was the fact that he was so different, that he came from a very different background musically, you know?
Yeah. Oh, well, and I've got to say, that's what I love. I love when you get different influences coming together and creating something new, because that's how you get something unique. Speaking of unique things, sort of, I did my homework very differently this month. What I did was, I had a copy of Other Folk in the car, which I had on almost constant rotation, because in the same folder on the USB stick, I also created the original version of Other Folk. In other words, I had the original version of Halfway to Heaven, I had the Mark Bolan version of Sitting Here, the Bob Dylan version of As I Went Out One Morning. In other words, all the original versions were also playing in the car on a constant rotation with yours, so that I could properly do my homework and properly have a conversation about the songs and the singers. So let's get into that.
Okay.
Well, before we get into them, let's talk about the 3 Dr. Robert songs that are on here. So first of all, obviously, Halfway to Heaven, which is basically the original recording with some overdubs, I think. Yeah,
that's it. The original recording was done, again, that was done in Bethesda at the old studio, with Alan White, who went on to join Oasis, playing drums, a guy called Glenn Scott playing unbelievable organ, and I was playing bass and guitar, and sang it live. We did it live. And I just thought, it's a really strong song. I think it should be a single. So I wanted to put some of Brian's kind of calypso-type guitar on it and a few bits and pieces. So that's what we did. And then Seventh Day is the same.
Before you move on, I just want to make the point, Halfway to Heaven, probably my favourite of all of your songs.
All of them?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's my favourite of everything you've ever done.
Well, that's very kind of you. I mean, I think it's a goodie.
It's one of those...
We did a version on Monk's Road with Angelina singing, which will come out at some point.
Excellent.
I think it's definitely right for covers. I think it was actually, to be honest, I think it was my mum's favourite song I ever did as well.
Oh, wow.
It's got something, it's just, I remember writing it just after we'd moved out of London and just on Sunday morning,
It feels like a really simple piece of construction that allows you to just sort of play out over the top. So it's like got this really, not necessarily simple, but the foundation feels uncomplicated, which allows you to do kind of just enjoy yourself. It's one of those songs where you just think, it's kind of got this bittersweet quality, but at the same time, you can absolutely tell that everybody who's playing on it is really enjoying playing on the song.
Yeah, it's very simple. It's the old 3-chord trick, really, and then with a kind of minor chorus. But I mean, you know, deceptively simple. Not easy always to kind of make those things work without being twee or too kind of passive or you know, cliched.
Well, it's got a typical Dr. Robert.
I think it just comes from the fact that I kind of really meant it when I sang it, and so there's an emotion in there which again, you know, it's a first take vocal sort of thing before, so I think that's what gives it its power, and then people respond to that play on it. Yeah.
And again, it's got that typical Dr. Robert thing with the lyric, where you sort of know what it's about, but you can't tell exactly what it's about, so you can bring some of your own meaning to it.
Yeah,
and
that's life, isn't it?
Yeah.
We know what it's about, but we don't really. It's all a mystery. There's that one, and then that Seventh Day was also something that we'd done on Bethesda again. That I thought, oh, that needs work. We can do better than that. So we did that. We recorded that.
Yeah, the version on Bethesda. Once you hear the version that's on here, the version on Bethesda feels really unfinished. But I mean, it's a nice enough song on Bethesda. But here, it just sounds like you really mean it.
No, because we started playing it live, and I thought, no, this is good. This is good groove.
Right.
This is great. And I love what Mick's doing on the bass. It just felt like we needed, you know, to put a definitive version, because the one on Bethesda was basically written on that morning and just recorded as a demo.
Right.
Um,
Well, and the other one here is the Fen Tiger, which actually, that sort of precedes the sort of other versions of that, which mostly come out around the Flatlands album a couple of years later. So I think that this is the first time that song appears, isn't it? I think so.
This is totally, this is a live jam in the studio.
Yeah.
I had no words. I had nothing. We were just playing. We were just actually checking the mics, you know, make sure it's all working. And it just, they just joined in. And then when I listened back, I thought, well, that's it. We got that. There's a tune, because I knew that I wanted the Fen Tiger's always, you know, it became the Flatlands theme.
Yeah.
Because I was working on that kind of East Anglian mythical landscape vibe where, you know, a bit like the Beast of Bodmin. Is it Beast of Bodmin?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
That kind of thing. I loved all that kind of stuff. And so that was, you know, and also we were in Lincolnshire, which is not a million miles away, and it was very flat and very weird to be back there. The light, everything about that part of the world, you know, became what Flatlands became. And I'd moved back to Cambridge, I think, just at this point.
Yeah.
Just gone back. So the Fen Tiger was in my psyche, obviously, but that was just a jam.
And sometimes something like that. I tell you what, the reason why I think that works so well is because that juncture in the album, because that's a really different sound.
Mm-hmm.
All the others are songs with like verses and choruses and things. And this instead is sort of like the sort of jazzy Dr. Robert-y version of a kind of a hip hop thing almost. I mean, it's not hip hop, but it borrows some of the structure of what you might do with hip hop or something like that, and sort of reinvents it as a Dr. Robert-y type thing. And I think just at that juncture in the album, that's just the kick in the backside that you need to sort of not wake you back up, but sort of make you sit up and take notice. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I mean, I think basically that's because it's got a distorted acoustic guitar. I put the guitar through an amp. But yeah, it's got something about it which is slightly menacing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, let's talk about other people's songs. And instead of going through in order, I think probably the best thing to do is to talk about the songs by various people and group them together. So let's talk about Bob Dylan first, since you already talked about him. There's two Bob Dylan songs on here. One, which was a recent song of his at the time, Death Is Not the End, was from 1988. So that was, I mean, when I say recent, relatively recent. And then the other one comes from 1967, As I Went Out One Morning, which comes from the John Wesley Harding album. I mean, these two songs, what were the reasons for the choices? Because they're not the most obvious, I suppose, of Bob Dylan songs.
Well, that's the reason right there. But, and also because I felt that I could make them my own a bit. I mean, the thing with Dylan was that, I was always kind of like a bit of a fan, but I never really went into deep Dylan territory until one day when I was driving from Oxford to Cambridge to pick up my lovely late mother-in-law, Zelda, who was a fantastic person and a brilliant artist and a very important person in my life. And in the car was a cassette of Desire that Michelle had picked up at some car boot or something. So I put it on to listen to as I was driving, having not really ever listened properly to Dylan albums, kind of resisting them in the 80s. Obviously loving Dylan, the idea of him, but totally then captivated by that album, Desire. And then from that point on, as I do, I listened to everything he ever did, including all the bootleg. And when everything you ever did with Dylan is a long listen.
Yeah.
And so including every bootleg and everything. And that led me down that whole archaeological dig and path towards the Greenwich Village scene and an album in particular called Harry Smith's Folk Anthology, which was really the blueprint for all those guys that turned up at Greenwich Village in the late 50s, early 60s, playing those coffee houses. Those songs were also related to old Scottish and Irish ballads that you might hear in South Carolina. And obviously I got that in my DNA because I remember my mum and my sister singing Gaelic folk tunes when I was little. It was all, and it leads you back and you end up listening to some Sun House records from 1920. And I realized that a lot of that, I needed to, after the Blow Monkeys split, I needed to re-educate myself, fall in love again with music, not as a career, not as a place to sell records, but as a place to go and find some sort of spiritual nourishment. And that's where I found it. And Dylan was the gateway drug, but that was really, there's so much, and there still is. But I would see, then I would group together within that mode of discovery would be Tim Hardin, Fred Neil being the godfather of the Greenwich Village scene.
We'll come back to Fred Neil because I want to ask you about him. Yeah,
Fred and Tim and Bob, they're all. That's where that came from, and that, in fact, there were other ones that I was thinking of doing, like Tim Rose and Tim Buckley, anyone called Tim, basically, and it was a great period in my life actually for listening to music and learning, because I was doing acoustic solo gigs at the same time, and listening to that kind of stuff and learning some different ways of tuning the guitar and just doing my homework a bit because it doesn't matter how successful you may have been or whatever you do, you still, in the end of the day, you're always learning and always, and you still, this is what I got from working with Weller actually, is that he's such a fan of music that you have to keep that child alive inside of you, the bit that's really knocked out by listening to music. It's not enough just to have a career out of it.
Yeah. Because by the end of the Blow Monkeys, I think, and sort of with things like Slam Slam and the Catch a Wave, it seems like as the Blow Monkeys goes on during the 1980s, you get more and more into sort of form and construction and less into the idea of necessarily songwriting as an art. And it seems like as soon as that period stops, and you can't see this from the outside, but clearly this is what you're describing, but it seems like there's a real whiplash moment where you suddenly turn everything on its head and suddenly it's all about the songwriting rather than the form and the construction. And so, it seems like your entire career sort of turns on a hairpin at some point. And obviously that's a much more organic sort of...
Yeah, that hairpin would be that cassette in the car.
Yeah.
Because that led me on the voyage of discovery. There were things before then. I was listening at the very late 80s, even around the time of Springtime for the World, I was really listening a lot to things like Scott Walker. And Scott Walker covered Tim Hardin's songs. So this is how I saw Tim Hardin's name first. He also did a lot of Jacques Brel. I knew Brel from Bowie, but I hadn't really checked Brel out. So again, another voyage of discovery. But you're right, there was a kind of abandonment of traditional songwriting somewhere around about. I think the Blood Monkeys' weakest album is Whoops, There Goes the Neighborhood, because I don't think that it's too clean and the songs were not quite strong enough, and I was trying too hard. You know, Grocer's Daughter was kind of made up in the studio, and I was excited, and we were doing so well. And then some of that was improvised, and some of that was technology taking over. And then by the time we get to Springtime, I've abandoned completely, almost, because I'm in club world and I'm enjoying that world.
Mm.
So this whole, but the shift back to songwriting, partly to do with the fact that I'm on my own and I've got an acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sit in a studio making loops and making things, and that's great for a while, but I wasn't getting enough from it, and I wasn't living that life anymore. I'd moved out of London. I wasn't in Brixton anymore. I wasn't going to clubs every night. I wasn't living above a record shop where I would hear the latest import from Chicago come in. I was in a different space. I had a young family. I was living next to a field of cows in Oxfordshire. And I had an acoustic guitar in the living room, and that's where. So kind of back to my roots, really, in a sense, because that's where I started off.
Right, quick, one more word about the sort of Dylan songs before we move on. And I think Death Is Not the End is a classic example of something. I don't know whether this is because I knew your versions of all of these songs. Certainly, I think most of them. Yeah, probably all of them before I knew any of the originals.
Mm.
But listening to Dylan's version of Death Is Not the End, I've got to say, it's one of those songs where you can tell it's a good song because you've made it into a good song, but it's a classic example of that thing that people say about Dylan, is he's written a nice song, but his version of it is slightly impenetrable, because his vocal on that is one of Dylan's oddest, certainly of the ones that I've heard. And you do this really nice sort of piano version of this song that it's a totally different arrangement to his version, and I think you've taken something that feels like it's a decent song, but perhaps the version he's recorded of it, perhaps he could have taken another couple of takes to find something else in that song, and you found that because you're coming at it from the outside.
Well,
and so I guess what I'm asking is, by coming from the outside, do you think you have a sort of objective view of what they're doing?
I mean, the thing with Dylan songs is that I know that that's first or second take for him, and then right. But they're so good. They are so good that you can get in there and make something else of them. I mean, when the cities are on fire with the burning flesh of men, just remember that death is not the end. I mean, that's Bob Dylan, man. I mean, Leonard Cohen maybe, Nick Cave maybe. There are not many people who can write words like Dylan. So you've got this poetry to play with. And these chords are very simple, and these melodies, but they're clever. And also, I'm a shit piano player, but I did it live. I even left the wrong notes in. I put in major sevenths where they shouldn't have been, and because I was singing it and playing live. And but I thought I'd leave those mistakes in honor of Dylan, because that's what he does. It's also exclusively the only track that Michelle has ever sung on. She's doing a kind of Nico type female background vocal. This little one, I don't even know if she got credited on it. Just a great song. I could do it a million times, you know. It's a masterpiece, and yet he just kicks it out in an album called Down in the Groove, which was awful. It was one of his 80. It was a nadir. It was an all-time. It was probably the worst album he ever made. He made a few in the 80s, but always one or two gems in there. Always one or two that only he could write. To write a song called Death Is Not the End, it's a big subject, you know, and he can do it. He's got the depth of knowledge and experience, and it's just a great storyteller and just magic with words. And I know what you're saying. A lot of people, they would just pass by. They wouldn't have even noticed that song.
Yeah.
But the first time I heard it, I was transfixed by the lyrics first. That's the thing about Dylan. So as I went out one morning, if we were talking about Bob, is from my favourite Dylan album, John Wesley Harding, which is, again, him just in the studio with a bass player and a drummer, an acoustic guitar. It was meant to be the first stage in an album that then the band would overdub on. Robbie Robertson and Levon Helm, and they'd all come in and do their overdubs. But Robbie Robertson apparently said, "No, that's it, Bob, it's done." And I love that album. And again, you know, there's a track on that, All Along the Watchtower, on that album. It kind of just passes you by, but it didn't pass Jimi Hendrix by, because he noticed how genius it was and thought, I can do so. That's the greatest Dylan cover of all time, I think. And it's just, you know, a psychedelic masterpiece. But the actual Dylan's version is just like a throwaway almost.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and I like the kind of biblical thing, and I like that kind of acoustic guitar just hanging on that minor chord, and my friend Brian playing slide, and I just start again. I can remember putting the headphones on and just playing it and just saying just F sharp and then just follow me, and that was it. First take. I would love to do more albums. Like, you've got to have the right players around you. But that's why it sounds coherent, you know.
And a strong enough idea going in. Tim Harding.
Yeah.
So you upset the grace of living when you lie, which is kind of, in his version, it's kind of a sort of a folky pop song again as well, I suppose. And you've done it, you've sort of rocked it up. Not quite rocked it up. You've kind of, well, in fact, that's the one that ends with that classic line. Do you remember who it was? Shut up, Howard. At the end of that song.
Yeah, it's Fred Neil.
That's, no, who shouts at you at the end of the song.
Yeah, Shut Up, Howard.
Yeah.
It's taken from a Fred Neil live concert.
Oh, really?
And Fred Neil is talking to somebody called Howard, I can't remember, I actually knew who it was, in the audience. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I just assumed it was somebody in the studio.
Yeah, well, that's why I put it in there. People would think that was what it was. It's got kind of Bo Diddley plays Tim Harding vibe to it, but Tim Harding just, I mean, a bit of a tragic figure, but obviously his first two albums, I think they're just called 1 and 2. They wrote the book, man. Were unbelievable. Things like Reason to Believe, If I Were Carpenter, Misty Roses, just amazingly. You know, Red Balloon, which I think the Small Faces covered. Obviously, Reason to Believe, everyone, Rod Stewart and everyone had hits with that. But Tim Harding's versions and his voice on those songs, still now give me shivers when I hear him. I've never heard such a beautiful singer. And then an amazing songwriter, amazing. And he burned briefly. You know, he was in Vietnam War, and like a lot of guys there, he picked up a heroin habit. So he comes back to New York with a handful of songs, but he sells his publishing for smack, basically. Wow. And plays Woodstock, and is out of it. But I've seen the filmed version of him at Woodstock, but he didn't sign off so that they could show, so that he could be part of the film of Woodstock. Had he done that, he would have had a career.
Oh.
Because a lot of people made a career out of the film Woodstock, like Joe Cocker, who were lesser artists, but some people just didn't sign off on it. Well, it wasn't just Tim Harding. But he was a fascinating and amazing, apparently not a very nice man, I don't care. He was a genius songwriter for the first two albums. I mean, just amazing.
Right. I'm not going to move on as far as I intended to. I'm going to do something else now. I'm going to lift the album cover up again. So this is for the people on the video.
Yeah.
And that is an homage to the second Fred Neil album, isn't it? Is it the second one that's an homage to? So it's not exactly the same. It's not a recreation of it, but it's certainly an homage to it with lots of the same elements and the very same feel. Fred Neil. There's two Fred Neil songs on here. A Little Bit of Rain and Ba-Di-Da. And I've got to say, I got hold of the two Fred Neil ones so I could stick them in this folder, and I was so impressed with these two. I went out and got the rest of Fred Neil's stuff as well. So I've got the complete Fred Neil now. I haven't had a chance to listen to it because I was doing my homework, but I've listened to a bit of it, enough to know that I'll be diving back into that later. He's kind of the other side of the coin from, what's his name that we were talking about before? I am terrible. Five Leaves Left. From
Nick Drake.
Nick Drake. I get Fred Neil and Nick Drake seem like two sides of the same coin to me in certain ways. They both had kind of short-lived careers. Nick Drake obviously sadly died. Fred Neil instead went off to look after dolphins. So he did like 2 albums. There's a bunch of other stuff, just like with Nick Drake. They've managed to drag out studio sessions and live recordings and all sorts so that there can be more Fred Neil for you to listen to. Basically, it's 2 albums and out, and then he goes to look after dolphins. And 20 years ago, he died. But, I mean, those 2 songs, and clearly from what I've listened to, some of the others as well, they're astonishing.
Mm. Yeah, the Fred Neil, before he became a Greenwich Village folkie, he worked in the kind of Brill building, which is the writing rock and roll office building in New York, and he wrote songs for people like Roy Orbison. He wrote Candyman, things like that. He was involved at rock and roll early on. Then he goes to Greenwich. Then he made an album with a guy called Vince Martin called Tear Down the Walls, which is one of my favourite albums of all time. It's the 2 of them singing. And then Fred breaks up with Vince, and he goes to Greenwich Village, and he's in it right at the beginning. In fact, the first gig that Bob Dylan ever played in Greenwich Village was playing harmonica for Fred Neil and Karen Dalton. There's a famous photo of Dylan playing, and it's Fred. And Fred Neil was the king of Greenwich Village. He was the first one in, playing his 12-string, his booming baritone voice. And he did these amazing gospel-y kind of folk things with a voice that just felt like it came from the depths of the earth.
Do you know who he sounds like? Do you know who he reminded me of? Kind of. Isaac Hayes. He sounds a bit to me like Isaac Hayes, I think.
Possibly, but he's 10 years before Isaac Hayes.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean, yeah. There's one video of him, I think it's, according to the blurb, it's the only time he's ever been filmed, of him playing dolphins, I think, with
Johnny Mitchell.
And with the guy from, not 10cc, the other one that's
Sebastian.
Oh yeah, Sebastian, yeah.
Loving Spoon.
That voice coming out of that mouth, you just can't believe it sometimes.
Exactly. That album, the album just called Fred Neil, which is the first one, which has got a picture of him and his son on the front. And that's the one, I think, with dolphins, and, it's probably got Everybody's Talking on it.
Yeah.
And it's got, Bardi Da and all that. And then there was the Bleecker and McDougal, which is the one that you say that the sleeve is. I mean, the only difference between Bleecker and McDougal is I like the for those who are watching and you can't see it, but I like the typeface, right? So I nicked the typeface. But actually, the picture of me is not in New York; it's in Skegness.
Says it all.
There you go. That's the difference between me and Fred. No, I mean, it was Heavenly. It was a guy, when I was at Heavenly, the first thing I heard was Tim Buckley's version of Dolphins. Have you ever heard that?
No, I haven't.
Check it out. He does it on the Earl Grey Whistle Test. It's on YouTube. Tim Buckley, another great, singing Fred Neil's Dolphins. And I loved it so much, and I saw Fred's name on it, and then I became obsessed for a couple of years because, well, where had he been all my life? I didn't know anybody who knew about him until I talked to like Jeff Barrett at Heavenly Records. And so I became obsessed with Fred and started playing his. There's something deeply spiritual about his voice and his songwriting. And I think, and also the idea that he'd written this beautiful song, Dolphins, and then gone off to Coconut Grove in Florida to work on a dolphin sanctuary. Yeah. He stopped playing. He basically stopped making records and playing in 1970. Okay, he had one advantage, which was that a song that he'd written called Everybody's Talking became the theme song for a Midnight Cowboy film, sung by Harry Nilsson. Everybody's Talking became a standard. I think even everybody Frank Sinatra did a version. Everybody, it's like one of those songs
Yeah.
that it deserved to be, but that must have seen Fred okay for royalties for the rest of his life.
Wow.
Because
I read,
he could give up.
I read that it's been recorded over 100 times and apparently is in the top 7 most played records on commercial radio in America of all time. So,
Well,
yeah.
That's beautiful poetic justice because Fred deserved it. And again, he was a heroin addict, Fred Neil. I mean, a lot of the people that I really love, Tim Buckley, Tim Harding, Fred Neil, heroin addicts.
Yeah.
There's something in there that they're seeking. I'm not saying that's directly related to their music, but there's a certain atmosphere, there's a certain kind of relaxed vibe. Almost
It's a state of grace they're looking
almost
for,
like
right?
a jazzy improvisation.
Yeah.
It's about the space as well as what's going on. You know? And Fred Neil was a life changer for me. I actually wrote to him after I'd done those versions, and I sent him through his lawyer, and I got a thank you back. But I was trying to get I was trying to get him to come out. I was trying to get him to come over, and I wasn't the only one. But he wasn't having it. He was happy where he was, and fair play to him.
Yeah. Right, 3 more people to talk about. I'm going to save the other 2 till after, but first, this one was the biggest surprise, because I didn't know this song, his version of it, and your version of it, I think is so very different from his version of it that when I heard the original, I was shocked. Because most of the songs on this album, they're recognisably the song that you're doing the cover of. This, there's a degree to which this is unrecognisable as the original. Curtis Mayfield, Now You're Gone, his version is this big, grand spanking, sort of a production number, but it's a big soul record with it sounds to me like a sort of northern soul underpinning, but with a big expansive soul thing over the top. And then the version on the album that you do is like this sort of slinky, relaxed jazz thing where the vocal kind of barely even registers, and it's just the musicians just really sort of having fun, hanging out, relaxing in each other's company, and using the song as sort of the launching point to do something almost entirely different, it felt.
Well, I mean, the original, I mean, it's basically a blues, right? It's what it is. It's
Yeah.
not modern soul so much. It's a blues. It's in that kind of 12/8 thing. And, Curtis loved Nat King Cole. And so if you were to ask him what was he trying to sound like on certain songs, it would be Nat King Cole.
Right.
That kind of laid back. And you would be bad. And I had done this before. I'd done that. Actually, I played with the Star Council at the very last gig at the Albert Hall, and Paul said, do a song. All right, I'll do that. So I did a version of Now You're Gone, and it was a big version because we had a brass section and da-da-da. But you strip it down, and it's all about the bass line. Dum, 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 dum. And so that, again, that was just, here, this is a bass line, mate, just play it, don't change it. It goes like that all the way through. I'll just jam on top. And here we go. And I wanted to abstract it, just sing the title, not have to, I did sing a bit of it and do it, but really, and I just loved it. I really like our version. It just, it just flows past. It just captures. I mean, it was one of those where we were playing it, and I'm going to the engineer. I'm looking through the window, going, press the fucking button.
Yeah.
Because we won't do this again.
You fade it in.
I'm trying to do that while I'm playing it. I'm going, and so he does. So that's why it fades in.
Yeah. It fades in and it fades out, almost as if you played it for the whole afternoon and you just chose the 4 minutes to put on the record that sum it up.
Well, almost probably that's how it was. That's how it was. Although we were playing it before the engineer hit the button. These are the days before digital, so it's tape. So he's trying to say tape, but I just said tape. Forgot to even say anything. So that's how that one came about.
Yeah. I've got to say, I've experienced myself of when you're sort of sitting in the room together playing a song and everything sounds wonderful. Then you say, right, let's record it. And so you stop, you press record, and you start again, and it's just not the same. So, yeah.
I've had that moments where I'm sitting there and we're playing and this is great, this is good. I've told the engineer, you know, in the morning, just take everything, and then we're doing it, and I think, oh, this is good. And we start, and I go, oh, that was great. How was that? And he said, oh, did you want me to record it? I wish I sent the boys in.
Yeah.
But, no, I mean, that's how it goes. You're just capturing little moments, you know, that's all it is. But I thought when you said it was unrecognisable that you were going to say Hippie Gumbo, because Hippie Gumbo is a completely different song to the Mark Bolan original. Whereas Now You're Gone is the right chords and the right words.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just the texture of it and the ambience of it is completely changed, isn't it?
Yeah, but absolutely, because it's a double bass acoustic guitar and a drum. I mean, and I think a tremolo guitar of Brian. So, you know, Curtis had an orchestra and a lot more time.
Oh, speaking of which, I meant to ask is it at the end of As I Went Out One Morning, and it sounds like there's a mandolin on there? Is that the one? Is it that, or is it Death Is Not the End? No, it's As I Went Out One Morning, I'm sure.
It's not mandolin, that's Brian playing acoustic lead on top.
Is that an acoustic lead? That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a really amazing sound that he captures there. It's lovely.
Brian's not very well at the moment, unfortunately, but
really?
Send him. He's such an important player and person in my life. You know, amazing guy, and that's like when the two of us would just sit together in the kitchen and just jam, and I would hear him do these things, and I'm so glad that I got a bit of that on tape.
Yeah. Oh, it's astonishing. It's lovely. Right, two more people to talk about. We'll come back to Mark Bolan. I think finish with him. But the other one is, now I don't know how to say this. Is it Ed Cooper or Ed Keeper?
Cooper.
Cooper. Spelt obviously, as people will recognise from the way I've said it. Not spelt as you might imagine Cooper to be said. So he's
in the German way.
Yeah. Well, he's from the Laughing Clowns then. So this is from his first solo album. It's from the mid-80s.
Yeah.
One Small Town.
He was before the Laughing Clowns. He was in the Saints. Seminal.
Yes, of course.
The seminal punk band. I mean, the Saints were as important as the Ramones for a lot of people, and you know. So obviously, you know, we've kind of talked in the previous episodes about my love for the Laughing Clowns and what I saw when I was in Australia and how that kind of turned my head and gave me. So I followed Ed's career all the way down the line, and I thought I really need to pay, my respects to Ed.
Yeah.
And it's quite an obscure song, but I just of his, but it's a lovely song, and I think we did it justice.
It's the original version of it is. It sounds like it was done in like 1978 or something. When you say he was in a punk band first, and then he was in the Laughing Clowns, which is the sort of jazz punk thing that people talk about when you were doing Limping. So you can, you don't sound the same as each other, but you can clearly tell there's a sort of fraternity between the sort of ambience of the two bands. And this very much feels like he's gone back to before the Laughing Clowns and done. This record sounds like the thing that should have sat between, the Saints and the Laughing Clowns. It feels very much post-punk 1978 new wave kind of sound on this, and yet it's a lovely song. And your version of it's got such a different sound to his, while clearly being the same song, that I think this is a beautiful illustration of that sort of classic thing about great songs, is that no matter how you do them, what you do with them, how you sort of change the instrumentation and the arrangement, the song still shines through.
Yeah, it's a great song, and we did it in a very simple way. I mean, there's nothing much to it. I think Brian played some fabulous kind of slide guitar, and I'm a very different singer to Ed, because Ed wasn't a singer. Ed wasn't the singer in the Saints. He became a singer in the Laughing Clowns, and found his voice, but he wasn't really a singer. Whereas I think I am a singer, and I tried to bring more kind of melody out of the song when I was doing it. I tried to hit,
Yeah.
but still paying respects to the song, because it's just a lovely song, and he's a great writer.
Yeah. Right, finally then, Mark Bolan. So we go out where you came in, sort of. So, I mean, the question here is, what was the rationale behind the two choices? Because these are not two obvious Mark Bolan songs to choose. And actually, in terms of the album, one's almost at the start, comes after Halfway to Heaven, and one finishes it. And they're not comedy songs, but these are the two most fun songs on the album. These are sort of, chirpy's not the right word, but there's something so upbeat and so unself-conscious about these two songs. They're just, my little boy, by the way, loves these two. I think they're his favourite too on this album, because I think they're just so catchy as well, and there's just something so ingenuous about them almost.
Yeah, that's the spirit of Mark's music, I think. I mean, Sitting Here was originally, I think, a B-side tucked away on the
Truck
B-side.
on Tyke.
Truck on Tyke, which was seen as the kind of the beginning of the end of T-Rex, Truck on Tyke. I absolutely love that song.
Yeah, of course.
But Truck on Tyke. But it was the beginning of the end, because it wasn't really a proper hit. But the B-side, his version is kind of like glam calypso or something. It's got Gloria Jones doing all sorts of weird things. But I just love the song. I just love the everyday observation of it, and the kind of jaunty chords. It was just felt like, come on, let's do this one. And Hippie Gumbo, obviously, I had started to do Hippie Gumbo at my solo gigs in the sort of early 90s. And it was a chance to kind of go anywhere I wanted on the acoustic guitar, because I didn't really stick to his version. I changed all the chords, I made my own version of it, really, but sticking to his lyrics and the kind of vibe in the song.
Yeah.
So, that's how they came about. And I think the album needed a little bit of the light touch that Mark brings to it. He's got that. I mean, not many people could get away with some of the stuff that he did lyrically. I mean, what does it mean? Metal Guru, is it you? What does it mean? It doesn't really mean anything. And yet it's one of the most joyous, uplifting 2.5 minutes you could ever spend, for me anyway, when I was young, listening to that. It's just it's just an explosion of joy. But it doesn't mean anything, really, but it does in another way. It means everything. So that's the kind of thing he had going, sitting here.
Well, who could get away with talking about picking their nose in the middle of a song, right?
Yeah, exactly. And get away with it.
And it just feels really natural.
There are people, Dylan, Neil Young, there are people that can do, Nick Cave, there are people that lyrically they could do that, but Mark had he had a sense of mischief.
Yeah.
It was fun. And so I just thought that kind of balanced out the album a little bit, which you might not, because if you've got things like Death Is Not the End and You Upset the Grace, I didn't want it, Now You're Gone, I didn't want it to get too dark. But I mean, to be honest, I only had two. I mean, I made this up in the van on the way, the list of what songs we're going to do, because it could have been, like I say on the sleeve notes, it could have been hundreds of others. It could have been so easily. It just so happens that these were the ones that I wrote down first.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Hippie Gumbo finishes the album on such an upbeat note.
Yeah.
Because Death Is Not the End would have been, I mean, it's a lovely sort of come down song for the end of an album.
Yeah, it's not exactly upbeat, I'll give you that.
No. Right, that's Other Folk then.
Good.
And I guess that's an album for which I've sort of really got a newfound respect for it, really, because like I say, it's not one that I often would think about before, and that's not because the album's not good, but just because I guess, like I said, when I come to a Dr. Robert album, it's Dr. Robert songs that I tend to look for, so a covers album wouldn't be my first port of call.
Yeah.
But here is a first port of call. This has been announced, the re-release of this now, so this is clearly our obvious next stop. So in January, we will be having the animal magic conversation.
Okay.
And so that is obviously what we have to do next, and that's going to be a big conversation. That's your breakthrough, I guess. That's the moment when the world changed for you, and we'll have that conversation next time.
We will indeed. But
until then, thank you once again, and although I'm not going to say Merry Christmas to you, I'll say Merry Christmas to everybody else.
Alan, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you too, Jay. I have a lovely time, and
see you next year.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.